They say betrayal comes when you least expect it. That the people closest to you can hide secrets so well, you'd never suspect a thing. I used to believe my life was perfect, until I learned the truth. And once trust is broken, there's only one thing left: revenge. The morning sunlight crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the bedroom. I stretched, blinking awake, and turned to see Sarah beside me. She was still asleep, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. Even after 10 years of marriage, she still looked as beautiful as the day I met her. I slid out of bed, careful not to wake her, and headed to the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as I stepped onto the back porch. Our house wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, a cozy home in the New York suburbs, perfect for raising a family. A blur of energy interrupted my thoughts. Dad. I barely had time to react before Lucas, my 5-year-old son, launched himself at me. I caught him midair, laughing. Whoa, buddy. What's the rush? Mom said we're making pancakes, he announced. With chocolate chips. I ruffled his hair. Then we better get started before she eats them all. Inside, Sarah stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. She smiled over her shoulder. Morning, babe. Morning. I kissed her cheek. You two plotting against me with pancakes? Always. Breakfast was loud and messy. Lucas talked nonstop about superheroes while Sarah laughed. Mornings like this made life feel perfect. After dropping Lucas off at daycare, I headed to work. My job as a sales manager wasn't exciting, but it paid well. It gave me time for what mattered: family. At noon, my phone buzzed. Anthony, lunch? I smirked. Anthony had been my best friend for 15 years. We met in college, survived bad relationships and worse decisions. Me, Joe's? 15 minutes later, I walked into Joe's diner, our usual spot. Anthony was already there, sipping a protein shake. Still drinking that crap? I teased. He smirked. Still pretending your job is interesting? I laughed. This was us, constant teasing, always pushing each other's buttons. While I built a corporate career, Anthony followed his passion, fitness. He owned his own gym, trained athletes, and had a solid online following. So, what's up? I asked, stealing a fry. Thinking of expanding the gym, he said. Maybe adding a boxing ring. You in? I raised a brow. Since when do I box? Since I decided to kick your ass in the ring. I chuckled. I'll think about it. But you know I prefer skydiving over getting punched in the face. Extreme sports were my thing. Skydiving, motorcycles, rock climbing, anything that got my heart racing. Sarah called it reckless, but she never stopped me. We talked about weekend plans. Thinking of hitting the trail Saturday, I said. Off-road biking. You in? Always, Anthony said. Sarah cool with it? Yeah, she's got client meetings anyway. We paid the check and headed our separate ways. That night, after dinner, I sat on the back porch with a beer, watching the stars. Inside, Sarah was putting Lucas to bed, his laughter echoing through the house. I took a slow breath, feeling nothing but gratitude. Life was good, maybe even perfect. Saturday mornings had their own rhythm. No alarms, no rushing out the door, just a slow, peaceful start. The scent of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as I stood by the counter, scrolling through my phone. Behind me, Sarah moved effortlessly between the stove and the fridge, flipping pancakes while humming softly. Lucas sat at the table, still in his pajamas, playing with his action figures as he waited for breakfast. 2 more minutes, buddy, Sarah said, ruffling his hair. He groaned dramatically. But I'm starving. I chuckled, grabbing a strip of bacon. You'll survive? Weekend breakfasts were something of a tradition in our house. No rushing, no distractions, just us together. It was one of the small things that made life feel perfect. By noon, I was on my motorcycle, tearing down the open road with Anthony riding beside me. The crisp autumn air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. The thrill of the ride, the power of the engine beneath me, it was pure adrenaline. We pulled into a scenic overlook, parking our bikes near the edge of a cliffside. The view stretched for miles, rolling hills, winding roads, and the city skyline in the distance. Anthony pulled off his helmet, shaking out his hair. Man, I needed this. Rough week? I asked, leaning against my bike. He let out a breath. Yeah, work's been nuts. Clients canceling, new ones being flaky. You know how it is? I nodded. Anthony put everything into his gym. He had built it from nothing, and while it was successful, running a business came with its own set of headaches. You ever think about expanding? I asked. Sometimes, he admitted, but that's a whole different level of stress. Yeah, but imagine multiple locations, brand deals, sponsorships. You could turn it into something huge. He laughed. And what? Become a corporate guy like you? I smirked. Careful. I might take offense to that. Anthony grinned, but there was something distant in his expression. Like he had something on his mind, but wasn't saying it. I didn't press. That was the thing about our friendship. There was never pressure to talk. If he needed to, he would. After a few minutes of silence, he stretched. Ready to head back? I nodded, slipping my helmet on. We revved up our bikes and took off, the road stretching endlessly ahead of us. Later that evening, I stood by the grill in our backyard, flipping burgers as Sarah set the patio table. Lucas ran around, chasing fireflies with a level of enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could have. Sarah poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. You guys have fun? Yeah, I said, taking a sip. Felt good to get out, clear my head. She smiled, watching Lucas dart across the grass. He's been talking about learning to ride a bike. Think you're up for the challenge? I chuckled. If I can handle a 1,000 cubic centimeters motorcycle at 120 miles per hour, I think I can handle a 5-year-old on training wheels. She smirked. I don't know. He's got more energy than you. After dinner, Lucas was out like a light, exhausted from running around. Sarah and I curled up on the couch, a movie playing in the background. You're always in a better mood after those rides, she murmured, resting her head against my chest. I ran my fingers through her hair. Guess I just need the rush. She tilted her head up to look at me. I love that about you. I kissed her forehead. Love you too. And I meant it. Every word. If there was one thing I was sure of, it was this. I had a best friend I could trust, a wife who loved me, and a life I wouldn't trade for anything. Saturday night was rare. A night just for Sarah and me. Lucas was staying over at Sarah's sister's place, which meant we had the entire house to ourselves. We went out for dinner at one of our favorite spots downtown. Candlelight flickered between us as Sarah swirled the wine in her glass, her eyes locked on mine. I miss this, she said softly. Dinner without a 5-year-old spilling juice everywhere. I smirked. She chuckled. That? And just time? Just us? I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. Then we should do it more often. She squeezed my fingers. I'd like that. God, I love this woman. After 10 years, she still gave me butterflies. Sunday morning, I met Anthony at the gym. It wasn't my usual scene. He lifted weights, I chased adrenaline. But I owed him a few workouts after skipping the last couple of weeks. You're slacking, man, Anthony teased as I struggled with the bench press. I exhaled sharply. I don't need muscle when I have speed. He laughed. Yeah, let's see how that works when you're 40. After an hour, we cooled down, sitting on the benches near the free weights. You remember that hiking trip in Colorado? I asked. Anthony smirked. The one where you almost fell off a cliff? Yeah, hard to forget. I chuckled. I never thanked you for that. Dude, I wasn't about to let you die. Who else would I get into stupid adventures with? I shook my head, smiling. This guy had been my brother in every way except blood. That evening, Sarah, Anthony, and I ended up at our usual bar. It wasn't planned. We just fell into our old routine. A football game played on the TVs above, neon lights humming against the wood-paneled walls. We had a booth in the corner, drinks in hand, laughter coming easy. Anthony made some joke about my terrible gym performance, and Sarah laughed, shaking her head. I don't know why he even tries. He's built for speed, not strength. You get me? I said, nudging her playfully. Anthony grinned. See? She knows. And then, just for a second, I saw it. Sarah and Anthony's eyes met, lingering just a little too long. It was subtle, a moment that could have meant nothing. But something about it felt off. The warmth in her eyes. The way he looked back at her. I blinked, and it was gone. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things. This was Anthony, my best friend, the guy who pulled me back from the edge, literally and figuratively. Still, for the first time, a thought crept in. Was I missing something? The next day, I tried to forget about it. I focused on work, ignored the nagging feeling in my chest. By the time evening rolled around, I had something else to channel my energy into. Base jumping. Anthony and I had planned this for weeks. A legal jump site, good weather, and the kind of drop that made your stomach flip just looking at it. Standing on the edge of the cliff, I felt the familiar rush, that perfect mix of fear and excitement. "You sure about this?" Anthony asked, checking his harness. I smirked. "Always." The countdown started. 3, 2, 1. I jumped. For a few perfect seconds, I was weightless, the world rushing past me, wind roaring in my ears. Then, parachute deployed, feet hitting the ground, adrenaline still burning through my veins. I lived for this. Anthony landed beside me, shaking his head. "One day, man. One day you're going to scare yourself too much." I laughed. "Not today." We packed up, headed back to the truck. But even as we drove home, even with the high still buzzing in my chest, the moment from last night stayed with me. Sarah's eyes, the way she looked at him. I told myself it was nothing. I wanted to believe that. But something had changed. I wasn't the jealous type. Never had been. Sarah and I had been together for over a decade, and I had never questioned her loyalty. Not once. So why the hell was I suddenly noticing things that had never bothered me before? Saturday afternoon, Sarah, Anthony, and I were sitting on the patio, beers in hand, the grill sizzling beside us. Lucas was playing in the yard, laughing as he chased a soccer ball. A normal weekend. Anthony cracked a joke, something stupid about my terrible sense of direction. Sarah burst into laughter, leaning back in her chair, her hand brushing his arm for just a second. I caught it, just a second too long. It was small. Nothing really. So, why did it feel like something? I forced a laugh, shaking it off. All right. Let's all roast Mark today, huh?" Sarah smirked. "Oh, come on. You walked into a glass door last week. That was comedy gold." Anthony grinned. "Wish I'd been there to see it." Sarah glanced at him, laughing again. "I sent you the video." I blinked. "Wait, what? When did you send him a video?" I asked casually, taking a sip of my beer. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Oh, I don't know. A few days ago." Anthony shrugged. She figured I'd appreciate it. I let it go. It was stupid. Just a joke. But something about it lingered. Since when did Sarah send Anthony random videos of me? Later that evening, we were cleaning up the kitchen. Lucas had passed out on the couch after an afternoon of running around, and the house was quiet. Sarah dried a plate, glancing at me. "Hey, by the way, I told Anthony we'd all go to that new brewery next Friday." I frowned. "Wait, what? When did you guys talk about that?" She looked up. "Oh, I don't remember. A couple of days ago." A strange feeling crawled up my spine. I always made plans with Anthony, not Sarah. "Yeah, sure," I said, keeping my voice even. "Sounds fun." But the unease didn't go away. The next morning, I met Anthony for a ride. The roads were clear, the air crisp, but my head wasn't in it. I was pushing my bike harder than usual, leaning into turns too fast, feeling the edge of control slip. Halfway through the ride, Anthony pulled up beside me at a stop. "Dude, you good? You're riding reckless as hell today." I exhaled, gripping the handlebars tighter. "Yeah, just got a lot on my mind." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Want to talk about it?" "No, not to him. Just work stress," I lied. Anthony didn't press. He never did, and I hated that it made me trust him more. That night, as Sarah lay beside me, fast asleep, I stared at the ceiling. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was overthinking, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. That every little moment I noticed, the glances, the hushed conversations, the small changes, was just my mind playing tricks on me. I wanted to believe it, but I didn't. Wednesday night, I walked into the living room to find Sarah on the couch, phone in hand, smiling at the screen. She didn't see me at first. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard like she was debating what to type. She looked happy. Too happy. "Who are you texting?" I asked casually, grabbing a beer from the fridge. She startled slightly before locking her phone and placing it face down on the table. That tiny delay sent a shiver through me. "Oh, just Jenna," she said, naming one of her co-workers. "She's having drama with her boyfriend again." I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. She could be telling the truth. So why did it feel like she wasn't? The next morning, I was heading out for work when Anthony texted me. Anthony, you coming to the gym tonight? Me maybe. Long day ahead. You already there? Anthony, nah, later. Just finished texting Sarah about Friday. I froze. Texting Sarah? I stared at the message for a moment before responding. Me, what's Friday? Anthony, the brewery. She said you were down. I clenched my jaw. I knew she'd mentioned it a few days ago, but why was Anthony texting her directly about it? I forced myself to reply normally. Me? Yeah, sure. Sounds good. I wanted to brush it off, but it stayed with me all day. That night, I pushed myself harder at the gym, hoping to sweat out the nagging thoughts in my head. I loaded extra weight onto the bar, gripping it tightly. One rep, another. Easy, man, Anthony said, stepping beside me. You're gonna hurt yourself. I exhaled sharply, setting the bar down. My arms burned, but it was nothing compared to the frustration boiling inside me. Just needed to clear my head, I muttered, grabbing my water bottle. Anthony studied me for a second. Everything good? I forced a smile. Yeah, just work stress. The lie rolled off my tongue too easily. Anthony nodded. Yeah, same here. He took a sip of his drink. By the way, Sarah said she might be late Friday, so we'll probably start without her. I froze mid-drink. Sarah said that? She hadn't told me that. I swallowed hard, forcing a casual tone. Oh yeah, he said, checking his phone. She mentioned it earlier. I nodded, saying nothing. But inside, my mind was racing. Later that night, after Sarah went to bed, I sat on the couch, phone in hand. I stared at hers. It was right there, face down on the table. My heart pounded. I had never invaded her privacy before. But something deep in my gut told me the answers were inside that phone. I reached for it. My fingers hovered just above the screen, and then it buzzed. I jerked my hand away like it had burned me. The screen lit up with a notification. A text. From Anthony. Sarah stirred in the bedroom. I quickly stood, shoving my hands in my pockets, breathing hard. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself there was probably an explanation. I told myself I was imagining things. But deep down I knew I wasn't. I used to believe that if I ever caught my wife cheating, I'd lose it. Yell. Break things. Walk away and never look back. But when it actually happened, when I saw the undeniable truth right in front of me, I felt nothing. No rage. No pain. Just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. They were already dead. That night, Sarah seemed normal. Too normal. She kissed me softly before heading upstairs, like every other night. But this time, she took her phone with her. That small detail stuck with me. She never used her phone in bed. I think I'll head to bed early, she said, stretching. Long day. I nodded. All right. I'll be up in a bit. And then she was gone. I knew. I knew before I even saw it. An hour later, I told myself I needed air. A walk. Something to clear my head. I made it halfway to the front door when I realized I left my phone upstairs. I turned back, and that's when I saw it. The bedroom curtains weren't fully closed. A small gap left just enough space to see inside. And there they were. Sarah, naked, on top of him, her head tilted back, eyes closed, lips parted. The same sound she made for me. Anthony's hands gripped her hips, guiding her, his mouth moving over her neck. It was slow, intimate, not just sex. And that was the worst part. This wasn't a drunken mistake. It wasn't some spur-of-the-moment regret. It was practiced, familiar, routine, which meant this had been happening for a long time. How long? Weeks? Months? Years? I stood there, watching through the tiny gap, my pulse steady. My breathing never changed. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't feel the need to scream. Because in that moment, something inside me snapped. And I wasn't Mark anymore. I stepped back, fading into the darkness. I smiled, because now I had a purpose. They thought they were getting away with it. They thought I was clueless. But the thing about betrayal is, it doesn't break you. It sharpens you. By the time I made it outside, the plan was already forming. Anthony first. We had a climbing trip coming up in a few weeks. It wouldn't take much to make sure his harness failed. Just a small adjustment, something subtle. A miscalculation he'd never recover from. I pictured it. Him screaming as he slipped, bones shattering against the rocks. He'd survive, but he'd never walk the same again. And Sarah? That would take more patience. She loved riding with me. She trusted me completely. She always wrapped her arms around me, so tightly on the back of the bike, pressing herself against me. She'd have no idea until it was too late. A sharp turn. A calculated crash. I'd walk away. She wouldn't. I came home an hour later. The house was silent. Upstairs, Sarah was already asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I crawled in a bed beside her, feeling her warmth against me. She sighed softly, shifting closer, resting her arm on my chest. Like nothing had changed, like she wasn't a walking corpse. I didn't move. I didn't react. Because now, I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her executioner. And she had no idea. Anthony had no idea he was about to lose everything. He laughed as we loaded our gear into the truck, clapping me on the shoulder. Man, I've been looking forward to this all week. We haven't done a serious climb in months. I grinned back, my expression effortless. Yeah, should be a good one. And it would be. Just not for him. The drive to the mountains was filled with our usual banter, reminiscing about past climbs, talking about the best routes, joking about near-death experiences. It almost made me forget I was sending him to his worst one yet. Almost. When we arrived, we parked at the trailhead, unloaded our gear, and checked our harnesses. Anthony trusted me completely. All right, I'll set up first, he said, tightening his straps. I nodded. Yeah, go ahead. He turned his back to me, adjusting his equipment. And that's when I weakened the knot on his harness. A few millimeters looser. Just enough that under sudden weight, it would slip. I did it in seconds, quick and precise. A movement so small, so insignificant looking, that no one would ever notice. Then I stepped back, heart steady. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said, smiling. Let's do this. The climb started easy, a good pace, steady handholds. The wind whistled around us as we scaled higher, the ground shrinking below. 50 feet, 70, 100. Then came the tricky part, a near-vertical stretch with a few scattered ledges. Anthony moved ahead, leading the way. Watch that section to the left, I called. The rock looks loose. Got it, he replied, shifting his footing. I watched every movement, waiting. His hand reached for a grip. Then his foot slipped slightly, sending a small spray of dust downward. That was it. The extra strain on his harness pulled against the knot, and it gave way. For a split second, he was weightless. Then he fell. The scream tore through the air as he plummeted. It was quick, brutal, his body smashing against the rock face before disappearing into the trees below. I let out a sharp, genuine-sounding gasp. Anthony! I shouted, already scrambling down. Branches cracked below. Rocks tumbled. The sound of impact echoed through the canyon. By the time I reached him, he was barely conscious, blood dripping from his temple, his leg twisted at a sickening angle. Shit, 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 I muttered, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. I called for help, my voice frantic. Everything about this was perfect. I had to make it look real. The rescue team arrived within an hour. They loaded Anthony onto a stretcher, his groans weak, pained. One of the medics turned to me. You were climbing together? I nodded, my face pale. Yeah, he just lost his footing. They believed it. Of course they did. It was an accident. It was always an accident. That night, I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel. Anthony would live, but his body would never fully recover. I pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine. The house was quiet, a single light glowing in the bedroom window. Sarah was waiting for me. I smiled. One down, one to go. Sarah had no idea she was next. When I walked through the door that night, she greeted me like always. A soft kiss, a warm embrace, the smell of her perfume lingering on my clothes. How was the trip? She asked, smiling. I smiled back. Rough, but we made it out okay. It wasn't a lie. Anthony made it out. Just not okay. The next few days passed like nothing had changed. Sarah and I laughed over dinner. We curled up on the couch watching movies. I listened to her talk about her day, nodding in all the right places. And every second, I was planning her death. The idea had come to me the night I watched her with Anthony. She loved riding with me. She loved the speed, the rush, the way the world blurred around us. Most of all, she loved the danger. But unlike me, she never took precautions. She never wore full protective gear, just a light jacket, jeans, and that stupid open-face helmet she thought looked cool. She thought she was invincible. I was going to prove her wrong. I started making small, unnoticeable changes to the bike. Sarah didn't know a damn thing about motorcycles. She didn't know when I loosened the brake line, just slightly, making it less responsive. She didn't notice when I adjusted the suspension to make the bike more unstable at high speeds. She didn't ask questions when I suggested a scenic ride through the mountains this weekend. She just smiled and said, "I'd love that." She had no idea she had just agreed to die. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling. I ran through every detail. The curve in the road, the speed we needed to hit, the exact moment I would throw the bike just right. I imagined the impact, the sound of her body hitting the pavement. I would survive. She wouldn't. The morning of the ride, Sarah was practically glowing. She kissed me, laughing. "God, I miss this. We haven't taken the bike out in weeks." I smiled. "Yeah, it'll be fun." She had no idea. I grabbed my gear, full protective padding, gloves, reinforced helmet. She grabbed hers, that thin jacket, her light helmet, nothing to protect her. "Ready?" I asked, starting the engine. She swung her leg over the bike, wrapping her arms around me, pressing her body close. "Always." I pulled out of the driveway, feeling her excitement, hearing her laughter as we sped off. She trusted me completely. She really shouldn't have. The ride started just as I expected. Emma clung to me tightly, her arms wrapped around my waist, her body pressing into my back as we raced down the open highway. The wind whipped past us, her laughter carried away by the roar of the engine. "God, I miss this," she shouted over the noise, her voice full of excitement. I smiled. "Yeah, it's been too long." She had no idea. The road stretched ahead, twisting higher into the mountains, the curves sharper, the cliffs steeper. Emma lived for the adrenaline, for the way I handled the bike, smoothly leaning into each turn. She trusted me completely, tilting her body with mine, as if we were one. "Faster," she called out, squeezing my waist. I obeyed, but not for the reason she thought. I could feel her heartbeat against my back, her chest rising and falling in sync with mine. It was almost intimate, this ride. One of those moments where she probably felt closest to me, where she believed we were connected, together, unstoppable. She had no idea how alone she really was. The perfect spot was coming up, a curve just tight enough, just sharp enough. If I hit it at the right speed, at the right angle, the bike would lose control. The wind howled in my ears as I watched the signs blur past. 300 feet, 200, 100. I exhaled, and then I jerked the handlebars. The world flipped. The bike twisted beneath us, tires screeching, metal grinding against pavement. Emma's grip tightened around me for a split second. Then it was gone. She was gone. Her scream was swallowed by the rush of wind and the deafening crash of the bike skidding across the asphalt. I felt the weight of her body leaving mine, her warmth suddenly disappearing. She flew. Her body slammed into the jagged rocks at the edge of the road with a sickening crunch. The sound of impact sent a shiver through me, though not from fear. I hit the ground hard, rolling over the pavement, my gear absorbing most of the damage. Planned. Controlled. I groaned, blinking through the dust and pain. My helmet was cracked but intact. My hands burned from the friction, but I was fine. More than fine. I forced myself to move, my body aching in all the right places, just enough to make my survival look believable. When I turned my head, I saw her lying just a few feet away. Still. Too still. "Emma." My voice broke perfectly. I let out a shaky breath, dragging myself toward her. Blood pooled beneath her body, soaking into the dirt. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven movements. She was alive, but not for long. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. She tried to speak, lips trembling, a weak breath escaping in a gurgled sound. I knelt beside her, leaning in close. She saw me, and in that instant she knew. Her gaze locked onto mine, her pupils wide with shock. I could see it all. The horror, the realization, the betrayal. She tried to lift her hand, maybe to touch me, maybe to fight back. But she was too weak. A single shudder ran through her body. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. A question. A plea. A curse. Nothing came out. She twitched once. Then, silence. I sat there for a long moment, just breathing. The world around me had gone still. No wind. No sound. Just the distant hum of the engine cooling down, the faint scent of burnt rubber and blood lingering in the air. Finally, slowly, I pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled, the perfect amount of panic. As I dialed, the operator picked up on the second ring. 911. What's your emergency? I took a deep breath, forcing a sob into my voice. There was an accident, I gasped. Please, my wife. I think she's dead. A pause. Then the voice on the other end softened. Help is on the way, sir. Stay on the line. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me, my breathing uneven. Okay, please hurry. I let the phone slip from my ear, staring at Emma's lifeless body. The perfect wife. The perfect friend. The perfect lie. Now just a broken thing on the side of the road. I closed my eyes and smiled. The sirens echoed through the mountains long before the flashing lights came into view. I sat on the ground, my hands trembling, my breathing ragged as the paramedics rushed toward me. Sir, can you hear me? One of them asked, kneeling beside me. I blinked slowly, as if pulling myself out of shock. She's over there, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly as I turned my head toward Emma's body. I tried. I couldn't. My voice trailed off as I let my head drop into my hands. The paramedic put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. We'll take care of everything. Just stay with us, okay? I nodded numbly, playing my part flawlessly. The next few hours blurred together. Police officers, medics, questions, sympathy. They asked what happened. I told them everything. A perfect mix of truth and carefully crafted lies. We were going too fast, I said, my voice hollow. She always loved speed, you know? I tried to slow down, but we hit the turn wrong. I lost control. A young officer nodded solemnly, jotting down notes. And you were both wearing helmets? Yeah, I murmured. But she never liked full gear. I always told her. I let my voice break, looking away. She didn't deserve this. A detective crouched beside me, his tone gentle. Listen, I know this is hard, but we have to ask. Was there any drinking involved? I shook my head quickly, almost offended. No. God, no. We were just having fun. He exchanged a glance with another officer, then sighed. It's a tragic accident. We'll need to do a full investigation, but from what we see, it looks like she was just unlucky. I closed my eyes. Unlucky. If only they knew. The funeral came a week later. People whispered condolences, their voices hushed, reverent. She was too young. Such a horrible accident. They were so happy together. I stood by the casket, my face pale, my posture stiff, a man drowning in grief, but holding himself together. I shook hands, accepted hugs, murmured quiet thank yous. Sarah's mother collapsed into my arms, sobbing. She loved you so much, she wept. I can't believe she's gone. I held her tightly, whispering, I would have done anything to save her. And in a way, that was true. The police investigation wrapped up soon after. Case closed. Accidental death. Just a bad turn, the report stated. Excessive speed. Lack of proper safety gear. Nothing suspicious. Nothing worth digging deeper into. I was free. That night, I sat alone in our house, a glass of whiskey in my hand. I stared at the framed wedding photo on the table. We looked perfect. Happy. The perfect couple. The perfect life. All of it was a lie. And now, the lie was over. I exhaled slowly, setting the glass down. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The world kept moving. And so would I. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. For the first time in a long, long time, I smiled.